Closing in on retirement is both a very exciting and impactful time in someone's life. I've seen people make great decisions for 25 years and then one mistake that derails the whole thing at the end. So, here are the biggest mistakes I see people make 5 years before retirement. The number one mistake I see people make is they get too conservative. They put too much of their investments into extremely conservative funds. And it makes perfect sense why people do this. I like to tell people, you're not a robot. These feelings are completely normal. You're going to feel the pinch when you retire because all of a sudden you don't have a paycheck anymore. And so they throw a lot of money into investments like CDs and money market accounts and bonds. Those are great investments for a portion of your strategy. What happens is it becomes the majority of someone's strategy. The best description I've ever heard of CDs and money market accounts are it's a great way to go broke really slowly. That's it. If you look at the statistics, the data, it shows that they do not keep up with inflation. So the value of your money, of your wealth is slowly eroding away. People do it for a lot of reasons. The biggest fear is that the market is going to collapse and that their money won't be able to recover. But the fear people don't think about is longevity. The fact that they probably have 25, 30, maybe even more years left in their life that they have to plan for. The mistake a lot of people make is they watch too much of the news. Just recently, I had a client reach out to me who was a little concerned because they're in retirement and they thought that their portfolio wasn't doing very well. So I gave them a call and we talked through it. And I asked them, were they aware of how much their portfolio was actually down? They said no, but that they've been watching the news and they just had a lot of fear going on, which I totally understood. I also let them know at that point their portfolio was down about 3%. 3% was it. And yet their emotions took hold. And that's what happens 5 years before and into retirement is people let their emotions dictate their decisions. The other thing that people have a hard time understanding is they hear about this thing called sequence of return risk. It's very much a risk. What it means is that your investments go down in the first part of your retirement. Typically, we'll pick 5 years as the first part. And then what happens is you have to sell some of your investments in order to support your retirement. So you're thereby locking in your losses, which once again, this is a type of risk, but only a portion of your assets need to be for that, not all. The mistake I see people make is they don't have an income plan. So once again, moving into retirement, you no longer have a paycheck. All you have is a pile of money. You have to in turn that into your new paycheck. So what do people do? They go from the gut. They just start pulling money from different places. They don't strategize about how much can they actually pull and make sure that their money is going to last, nor do they think about where should they be pulling it from. There's no coordinated strategy. A lot of retirees are going to have three different types of accounts. They're going to have a tax deferred account, like a 401k and an IRA, a Roth account, and they're going to have a taxable account. There's a way to coordinate these things in order to optimize the success of your plan, which actually segues into our next biggest mistake. That is, they don't have a tax strategy. Once again, they're pulling willy nilly from these different accounts, going by, I don't know, gut feeling, things like that. The next thing they know, they have a giant tax bill at the end of the year. They end up pulling from the wrong accounts at the wrong time. The other thing is they don't understand the far reaching consequences of what they do now. I'll give you an example. Roth conversions. This is when you move money from a tax deferred or traditional account into a Roth account. When you do that, it is a taxable event. You have to pay taxes on it. But after that, the money grows tax free in the Roth account. There is a way to look at this scenario and project it year by year out for 10, 20 years and understand what are the long term ramifications of this. What happens is people hear about a strategy such as Roth conversions. So what do? They start converting everything and then they get a giant tax bill. And it's a large mistake most of the time. The other piece that people don't take into account is IRMA. IRMA refers to how much of a premium you pay on your Medicare Part B. This has to do with your income, not from last year, but from actually 2 years ago, is what dictates how much you're going to pay on your Medicare Part B. So, in the example I just gave about Roth conversions, if someone does a lot of Roth conversions, jacks their income sky high, 2 years later, they're having to pay extra for Medicare. They probably didn't even realize it. Little decisions. That's what I want to get across from you. A lot of these are little decisions, but they add up to big mistakes. A lot of times when I'm talking about taxes in terms of a retirement strategy, I talk to them about tax deferred accounts. So this is 401ks, traditional IRAs, anything you haven't paid taxes on yet. I call it a ticking tax bomb because a lot of times people have the vast majority of their wealth in this bucket. And what happens is someone has to pay taxes on that eventually. It might be you, might be your kids, but someone will pay taxes. The government is going to get their money. The government's like the mob. They're going to get their money. Okay. So what do? We try to figure out when is it optimal to actually get that money out. That's the way to think of it. Think of the ticking tax bomb and the fact that we don't want that thing to go off. So we're going to try to spread out our tax burden on those type of accounts. The next mistake I see people make is they segment their accounts. So what does that mean? Well, let's go back to the three buckets. We have tax deferred, raw, and we have taxable accounts. What happens is a lot of times people will think of their strategies for one particular account. They'll think, ooh, I got my taxable account, so I'm going to do these investments here. Oh, but my 401k is over here. I'm going to do them like this. And they don't look at the big picture because when it comes down to it, all of your accounts together, those are your investments. Think of it as if you have a house with a bunch of different rooms, right? And you keep all of those rooms nice and tidy, except for one room. That one room is a meth lab. What just happened to the value of your home? What happens if that meth lab blows up? Now, that's a crazy example. I get it. But it can have real life application when it comes to investing. You can have one account that ruins the whole strategy. So when it comes down to it, you need to look at all of your accounts together and understand if that's the optimal strategy for you. The other thing with segmenting accounts is you need to understand asset location. I'll give you an example. Roth accounts. So this is money you've already paid taxes on that's growing tax free. So what types of investments should we normally have in a Roth account? Well, typically, those are going to be our most aggressive investments. Why? Because we're never having to pay taxes on them again. So shouldn't we want the most growth of any account to be a Roth account? Yeah. So that's where we're typically going to put our most aggressive types of investments. Here's another example. Taxable accounts, so non-retirement accounts. What types of investments should we try not to have in here? Income producing investments. Why? Because income producing investments such as bonds or dividend paying stocks, whenever they issue income at short term capital gains, we want to try to avoid that if we can. How do we do that? We'll put those types of investments into a retirement. Why? Because even though they're generating income, we don't have to pay taxes on a tax deferred account until we pull that money out. Another example of a mistake people make 5 years before retirement, they underestimate the impact their emotions are going to have on their decisions. Their entire life, when they've been investing, they've always had what? A paycheck. They've had money coming in. So what happens when they get to retirement and they no longer have that paycheck? Well, all of a sudden, you're having to pull from investments and we see a market downturn. People react emotionally. They start making decisions they normally wouldn't. They're selling off things, locking in losses and things of that nature. Mike Tyson had an amazing quote. I bring it up all the time when it comes to investing. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I think he said, everybody have a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I think that's how he said it. Mike, please don't come and hit me. It's just a joke, buddy. Point being is, when it comes to investing, especially in retirement, you're going to get punched in the mouth. We are going to see downturns. You just are. How are you going to react? You're not going to know until it hits you. Okay, so what's the best way to prepare for that? You need to understand what you can do to try to avoid an emotional decision. Something I suggest to people is have a safety net, have a set of investments set aside so that you can ride out those downturns. You need to have a strategy ahead of time. Otherwise, you're going to get punched in the mouth. You're not going to understand how you're going to react. You're going to react emotionally. Next thing you know, you're incurring a lot of large losses. Because when it comes down to it, the worst decisions I see people make are right before retirement and right into retirement. Why? Because they haven't been punched in the mouth before. People that are 20 years into retirement, old veterans, they've seen those downturns. No big deal. They've been punched in the face a lot, metaphorically speaking, of course. But once again, understand that you haven't been punched in the mouth before, and so figure out how that's going to work when you do. Retirement, can be an amazing time. I see people living the best years of their life in retirement, especially those first 5 years. I call them the bucket list years. Why? Because those are the years that everybody's been waiting for. And they got this bucket list that's been generating for decades and they're going to go do it. And that's amazing. But it also can be an extremely stressful time, especially if you're not prepared. You see those downturns, things of that nature. So please take these things to heart and try to avoid those big mistakes before retirement.